I have kept black water tanks with leaf litter bed and botanicals for many years, and probably one of the biggest challenges that I have experienced is how to take care of your leaf litter bed, how to preserve this beautiful layer of fallen leaves on the bottom of your tank, how to make sure that it doesn't just disappear within a week, it doesn't decay, and it stays there and it provides this beautiful viewing pleasure for yourself, as well as a perfect cover for your fish, perfect place for them to breed, perfect place for fish fry to hide from other fish. So in this video I will share two major tips on how to take care and how to maintain your leaf litter bed. So I'm sure that all of you have seen on YouTube how some famous aquascapers put together beautiful tanks, black water tanks with leaf litter and with botanicals on the ground, how they boil their leaf litter, how they create beautiful scapes. And I'm sure that possibly some of you have tried to imitate something like that in your home aquariums, and when you've tried to set up a black water tank with botanicals and with leaf litter on the ground, you've probably followed the same steps. And what quite a lot of beginners will experience is that everything might go well, you might have a beautiful scape, you will put down your leaf litter, and a week later you will find out that most of these leaves will start decaying, they will start decomposing, falling into pieces, they will start clogging your filters, your fish will kind of scatter them around, your water will be murky. These leaf litter, pieces of decaying leaf litter, they will be literally everywhere, and most of the time this will be the end of your black water or your leaf litter fish keeping efforts. So most people would never go back to keeping leaf litter. They will consider it as a nuisance, as something that creates just extra work, creates lots of mess in your tank, and they will just move on keeping fish the way they were keeping previously. So I have to tell you that I've been there already. So I've been in situations where I would boil my leaves and I will put them down in my tank, and a week later they're decaying, they're gone, so I have to add new leaves, and the same story all over and over again, and this turns into some sort of a incredible effort, continuous adding of leaves, and that's a lot of labor, lots of work, and lots of unnecessary work actually. So tip number one, don't boil your leaf litter. By all means, do not do that. I know this is a very contentious topic, and I myself have spent years boiling my leaf litter and stepping in the same mistakes over and over again until I finally learned the lesson not to boil my leaf litter. So why do people boil leaf litter? First of all, to disinfect it, basically remove all sort of bacteria and parasites from leaf litter. Second, to make your leaves sink, because if you add dry leaves to your fish tank, they will just float on the surface, they're not going to sink. So if you boil them, they will sink straight away. Also, people boil leaf litter in order to obtain tannins. So basically, after you boil your leaf litter, you will have this tannin stained water in your pot where you boil your leaf litter, and you can add this water to your tank and your tank immediately becomes black water. So these are the reasons why people boil their leaf litter. What seems to be the problem with boiling? Well, after you boil your leaves, you basically destroy the structure. You will make them soft, and they will decay really fast and really easy, because with some types of leaves, for example catappa leaves or Indian almond leaves, if you boil them, they will fall apart really fast. It will take them literally a few days before they will literally fall into pieces. Even if you don't boil catappa leaves, they will decompose really fast. They will normally stay intact in your fish tank for a week, maybe a week and a half, if they're not boiled. If they're boiled, this time frame will be even shorter. So let's look at disadvantages of boiling leaves, which I've mentioned a moment ago. Disinfection. Well, that's true that if you boil your leaves, you will kill all bacteria, you will kill everything living on your leaves, and probably that's a good point, but in many cases you don't really want to deprive your leaf litter of any bacterial life, because you would want some bacteria to breed, to colonize your leaf litter, and if they're boiled and if they're completely literally sucked out of any life, it will take some time before bacteria will start colonize your leaf litter, and by that time they will already start decomposing. If you think that boiling will disinfect your leaves from chemicals, from pesticides, from fertilizers that are likely to be used in some urban areas, you're mistaken, because they are not going to deal with any of these issues. I've done quite a bit of research into these topics, and I can say for sure that boiling does not remove fertilizers. It can remove a certain percentage of pesticides, but it's certainly not going to remove chemicals such as, for example, iron, mercury, acids, especially acids. Acids not going to remove through boiling. So for example, if you've collected your leaf litter in your local park and you live in an urban area, it is likely that your local authorities are using some sort of pesticides and fertilizers in that park to deal with parasites, and obviously traces of those pesticides and fertilizers will be left on leaf litter. If you boil these leaves in order to use them in your fish tank, it is not likely that you will remove those chemicals. The chemicals will remain, so you will only kill the bacteria. And if you believe that this will be a sort of a safe leaf litter to be used in your fish tank, that would be a mistake. So they will still have traces of chemicals, most likely traces of fertilizers, and quite possibly traces of pesticides. So what about floating aspects? So what if you want to boil your leaf litter in order to get them sink fast? You're not a particularly patient person and you don't want to see these leaves floating on the surface, and you want them to be straight on the bottom of the tank, so that's why you boil them. The situation is quite simple. If you use some softer species of leaves, they're likely to float for quite a long time if they're not boiled. But if they're boiled, they will certainly sink and decompose really fast. So you would want to use more durable and harder species of leaves. For example, jackfruit leaves. If you float them, if you add them to your tank, they will float for about a day. Sometimes in my tank they float for a couple of days and they will sink afterwards. So there's really no point of boiling them just to make them sink, because they will sink in a matter of literally hours. It's like 48 hours and they will be on the bottom of your tank. So it's not worth the effort of boiling them. And these are relatively hard types of leaves, so they're heavy and they're quite thick, and they have lots of structure to them. My second tip will be related to this aspect. So the second tip is a type of leaves that you need to use in your fish tank. If you use softer leaves, as I've said before, they will decompose and decay quite fast. It doesn't matter whether you boil them or you don't. If you don't boil them, obviously they will survive a bit longer, maybe an extra week. But if you boil them, they'll fall apart straight away. Well, I mean, within a matter of days or something like this. So one thing that I've learned is not to use the softer leaves as leaf litter bed. For example, Indian almond or catappa leaves, they're perfect for disinfecting water, for making water darker, and I would use them, for example, in my quarantine tanks, in some tanks where I want to disinfect water, where the fish have some injuries, and I will add this catappa leaf to treat them from those injuries. But I will not use catappa as part of leaf litter, because it's not going to last long. Literally, it is going to last maybe for a week, maybe a couple of weeks, and it will fall apart afterwards. So it's quite a waste of catappa leaves. So what I'm using currently most of the time are jackfruit leaves. These are very durable leaves, and they last a really long time in your fish tank. I don't boil my leaves. In a moment I'm going to show you how I prepare my own leaf litter, but after I add them to my tank, they float for a couple of days and then they sink, and they will stay on the bottom almost intact for at least a month. a month later they will start decomposing, but also very slowly. They will fall into pieces, but also very slowly. They rarely fall into small pieces. They usually just have like a skeleton of them left, and which looks very natural. So this is a very efficient type of leaf that you can use for your leaf litter. It's going to last long, it's going to release tannins very slowly and not too many tannins. So for example, if you don't want particularly dark water in your tank. So there are probably other types of strong structured leaves that can last really long time in an aquarium. I know some species of oak tree, for example, have leaves that can last really long time, and some other species of trees can also have very durable leaves. But you need to really pay attention at the type of leaves you're using in your aquarium, because if you choose those species that can last a really long time, you don't really need to do anything with your leaf litter, and it will just stay that way for a certain period of time. So what I normally do is I soak my leaf litter in clean water, in filtered water, for a couple of days, literally, so just they get softer, they release some of the tannins. These are jackfruit leaves, and they've been in this container for a day and a half. You can see that they've released very little tannins. The water is not even brown, it's like slightly yellowish. They certainly do not release too many tannins, and they already sink. You can see they already are on the bottom, and they've been here just for a day and a half. So I will just remove this water and I'll wash them in some tap water, just briefly, just to make sure there is no slime on them or anything of that kind. And now they are ready to be added to the fish tank, which is what we're going to do right now. So now I'm just going to add these leaves to my fish tank, and well, some of them are going to sink, others still need some more time, but yeah. And this is what's happening when I say something is going to happen and it's not happening. They're not sinking, although they looked like they were actually floating on the bottom of this container. But in any case, it's not going to take them too long to sink, because you can see that they're not too much floating. They're kind of heavy, and they kind of already leaning towards the bottom of the tank. But overall, yeah, I would say that probably tomorrow morning they're definitely going to be on the bottom of the tank. So I'm not too concerned about that. And even while they're staying up there, it still looks great and looks okay. I don't mind it. You can see they're already kind of vertical rather than horizontal on the top, so they will most likely go down really soon. Oh yeah, this one is nearly sinking. I'm pushing it, yeah. Well, another point you might consider if you use a leaf litter bed in your tanks is proper filtration, because no matter what kind of leaves you're using, eventually they are going to decay. Even if you use even the very hard leaves, they will still decay over time. And this decaying mass of leaves will eventually accumulate on the bottom of your tank. So you need some sort of filtration that will basically suck in all this decaying matter, and you can clean your filter and remove it with your filter. You cannot siphon your leaf litter bed for obvious reasons, because your siphon will get clogged with all sorts of botanicals on the bottom, and also you're likely to siphon good leaves along with bad leaves. So I normally use canister filters, because they provide the necessary level of filtration, and they will basically take in all the decaying leaf litter. Using sponge filters is not necessarily a good idea, because sponge filters will not be able to absorb this decaying leaf litter matter, and they're likely to get clogged really fast, unless you have a really huge sponge filter which can manage this mass of leaf litter. And yeah, in my case on this tank I clean my canister once per month, and it's normally just full of decaying leaf litter and nothing else, because fish don't produce much waste. They're mostly small fish living in this tank. So yeah, proper filtration is another aspect which can help you a lot with your leaf litter, because eventually the decaying leaf litter mass needs to be replaced. It needs to be basically removed through filtration. Alright, I hope these tips were useful. So tip number 1, don't boil your leaf litter. If you're not sure about the source of your leaves, don't use them. Try to collect your leaves in areas which you know are away from any sort of agricultural or other human activities, where there's no fertilizers, no pesticides, and no other chemicals. In that case, you're sure that your leaf litter is clean. Or you can buy them, like I do, for example, with jackfruit leaves, from a reliable source, from a reliable seller of these leaves. In that case, you can also be sure that they are clean, and you don't need to boil them, because boiling is not going to solve the issue with chemicals. It's just going to remove all the bacteria, including beneficial bacteria, from your leaf litter, and it's going to shorten their life. So boiling is not a solution, and I would personally not recommend it unless you really think that it's going to help you. The second point, try to use those types of leaves which are harder, which have more structure, which are more durable, and which are likely to last longer, simply because it doesn't make sense replacing and replenishing your leaf litter bed on a weekly basis. That's just too much work, and it's not really worth the efforts. Try to use harder leaves, not catappa leaves, definitely not. And the third aspect, which is not necessarily a tip but just an overall suggestion, try to have proper filtration for your tank, which can deal effectively with decaying leaf litter mass, because no matter what kind of leaves you will use, eventually you will still have some decaying mass of leaves that needs to be dealt with and needs to be removed from your tank. If you want to create black water in your tank, using leaf litter, especially boiling leaf litter to create tannins, this tannin stained water, is not necessarily the most efficient way, because you will have only a limited amount of tannins in your boiling water, and if you keep leaf litter in your tank, even if you have a lot of it, they are going to release some tannins, but probably most likely not enough to make your water black. It depends on the amount of leaf litter you use and the size of your tank, but most of the time leaves alone are not enough to create black water. So the first thing I would recommend if you want to create black water are alder cones. They will release tons of tannins. Actually, they're sort of a small tannin bombs, and definitely do not boil them. If you boil them, you'll remove everything from them. You just need to add them to your tank, like so. So just a few. They will float for a while, usually for a day, and then they will sink, and then will release lots of tannins. If you want to create black water really fast and really effectively, I would suggest using rooibos tea. It's also called red bush tea in English. Rooibos it's originally from South Africa, so it's called rooibos in Afrikaans language. This is what it looks like. You would need to add, probably for a tank of this size, this is a 140 liter tank, I would use about 7 teaspoons of rooibos tea. So you just need to boil it and add it straight away. But again, it always different in case of different systems, and you would just need to check it depending on how dark you want your water be. And this tea is actually also very beneficial for fish, because it releases lots of antibacterial properties, so it does really great things for your fish, and it's actually very delicious, so you can drink it as well. Hope this video was useful. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet. Leave your questions or comments in the comment section, and I'll see you soon.